In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good morning. So glad that you're here today. A podcast that I often listen to as I prepare to preach suggested that it might not be such a bad idea for the preacher today to ask their congregations to practice clutching their pearls, real or imagined, loudly, audibly gasping. There's going to be several moments that come up in this story of the prodigal son, and so we might as well practice, they said. Rampant throughout Jesus' most well-known of parables, that of the prodigal son, are these pearl-clutching moments. Moments of utter scandal that would have truly shocked the hearers of their story. Moments that have either become muted or dimmed in our familiarity, or just simply do not carry the same cultural weight and societal weight that they would have then. And there are many more moments than we might otherwise think, many more moments than we were probably taught in Sunday school, more than it might seem at first, as we come to see, and this is a spoiler alert, that perhaps the biggest scandal of all has nothing to do with the person for whom this story is known and named. We'll move our way through at least a few of these shocking, scandalous moments. I'll leave the loud gasping and pearl clutching to your imaginations. Many of these moments, especially at the outset of the parable, are on the more obvious side. The first comes right out of the gates as the younger of the two sons in the parable demands his inheritance. The share of the property that will be left to him, the share of his money. On the surface, this may seem like no big deal. The dad will give it to him anyway, so why not now? Except that to make such a request, this younger son was in effect saying to his father that he wished his father were dead. He wished he were dead so that he could get what was rightfully his now, and not wait until he did in fact die. And in order for such a request to be fulfilled, the father would have had to publicly and openly divide the deeds of his land, making clear the desire of his son for him to be dead to the whole community. This is an offensive and hurtful and public insult to his father, not some simple, easy request. And though this moment might gloss by us in our 21st century hearing, it certainly would not have then, and would have been truly shocking. So if you haven't already gasped in your mind, that would be the first time. Of course, that's not all. The next and even more scandalous moment of this story is that the father does it. The father does it. We don't know how he felt about the son's request. We don't know if he was offended or hurt or maybe even felt some relief that he would be on his own now. Who knows? It doesn't really matter. The one whom he loves thinks that he needs something, and the father is willing to see beyond his own ego, his own hurt, to the need of his beloved child. A gift freely offered, without exception, without condition, without rules and regulations, without agreeing to a terms and conditions statement. The gift of who the father was, all that he had, given to the child. His son's selfishness has just caused him embarrassment and shame publicly. And instead of insisting on correcting the son's behavior or demanding an apology, the father holds out a more generous way than selfishness, a more abundant way than needing to get even with his son. The father does not worry about what is rightfully his, or even about himself at all, and gives more than anyone else thinks he should, for the sake of the one whom he loves. There is no doubt of the scandal and shock that would have been more than abundant in that moment, but it ought to be just as so to us now. The father's example of generosity in the face of being wronged, of abundant giving over getting even, of seeking someone else's thriving over feeling like he is owed something, is a shocking, pearl-clutching moment to our 21st century minds. We stand in a world, we live in a world that values the other, that values the selfish way, that values getting even. So the Father's example of generosity in the face of that is certainly scandalous. Of course, we know that this generosity is not met with the world's best stewardship. The inheritance is squandered, and this younger son is left to work the fields with the pigs, even at his most desperate point of thinking it just might be worth it to eat their leftovers if he could just have something to eat. This isn't an illustrative point about how physically and dirty and smelly he would have become, or even his desperation. But it points out to us that as a Jewish man, to be willing to go even to the most forbidden of animals would have put him outside of his own faith tradition. Taking on such work and eating such things, he would have found himself outside of the story that grounded his life. So I guess what I'm saying is this. The younger son in this story is often portrayed or understood to be one who simply goes and lives like he wants for a while, loses it all, makes some bad choices, comes home, and all is well. And broadly speaking, that's true. But in the process of doing that, he has offended and broken relationships with himself, with his family, with his community, and with his faith. He has put himself on the outside of just about everyone and everything, wronging them, hurting them, offending them. This is not just about a few bad choices, but serious offense brought to nearly everyone he would have known or who knew his family. The scandal and shock of living this way was real. And thanks be to God, none of us are like that too, right? Oh, wait. Oh, it's just me? You know, I don't think this parable has become so popular and well-known because it's a nice lesson on how to treat our things, or even a lovely tale of a parent's love. Rather, there is some shared awareness, whether just on the surface or somewhere deep down, that this is the true picture of humanity. This is the true picture of us. Selfish, only worried about our choices for now and not how they will affect the future, concerned only for what we want. We connect with this story because at least that part of it is true. We know it, we've lived it, we are it. It is perhaps the hardest thing in this world that we live in to not be carried away by these waters and to walk upstream. This story isn't just a referendum on our personal choices, but is a profound and stark reflection on what our society holds up as the ideal and standard, and how it tempts us to work for our own gain, to prove everything we have by how much harder we work and what we have, how it values casting aside of those who haven't earned it and those who aren't at the top. I believe this parable has staying power because even throughout the centuries and until now, it is us. It is the human experience in big ways and small, in interpersonal interactions and communal choices, and societal structures that still affect our world, and in so many other ways that we live and move and have our being. There is a reason that we read this story in Lent. And as much as I think that is true, that this story tells a true story of humanity, it isn't the entire picture. The parable doesn't end there. That isn't the complete and full picture of how we live and who we are. After the younger son hits bottom and he wants to relate to God like we all do when we've messed up, groveling, crawling back, and proclaiming, "I have sinned before heaven against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands." After he feels that he needs to do that, he's beginning to say, "Let me work back into your good graces. Let me earn your grace, earn your goodwill, earn your love. If I can just do something, whatever it is, I'll do it. If you'll just do something for me." So I think in so many ways, he just still hasn't learned. And here comes the biggest shock and scandal of the entire story. As he starts to offer those words, The father runs to him as if he has been looking for him, searching for him, seeking for him, waiting for him this entire time. Consumed with joy, the father demands the best robe, a sign that his son is indeed family. He demands a ring, giving him the authority of a son. He asks for sandals, a sign that he has dignity and importance. And most scandalous of all, he kills the fatted calf, a sign that a communal meal, a communal party is to be had. In each of these gifts, the father repairs all of the broken relationships, the massive missteps, the selfish choices of his younger son, restoring him to good and right relationship with all. And he does so in a big and generous way, with no need for the son to grovel or be miserable or to earn it or to repay. The father simply meets his pain, his shame, his desperation, and says, "Everything I have is yours." And the scandal of it all is this. This is exactly who God is. This is exactly who Jesus is saying God is. This is exactly who God is for you. Perhaps you haven't lived like the prodigal son, or perhaps you have. Perhaps you have in ways exactly like he does or in others. It doesn't really matter. God rejoices in you. God has been seeking you. God has flung open God's embrace to meet you on your return. Whether you make that return journey weekly or daily or hourly, God is there, and God's words for you are this: everything I have is yours. Everything I am is yours. There's an author named Scott Erickson who points out that we have done an interesting thing, and perhaps a revelatory thing, in naming this parable. He says that at the end of the story, Jesus doesn't say, "And now please call this story the prodigal son." Rather, we have named it that. Despite everything going on in this story, we have named it based on the younger son and his faults, and more accurately, around our shame. He offers this name instead: the house of belonging. Because the father in this story, or the mother as he draws it, embodies the bold, shocking, startling claim of God's abundant love. You are my child. Everything I have is yours. You belong in this house. And my friends, on this day, so too does God make that same invitation to you. God makes that same promise to you, as God once again says to you, running to you with shouts of joy and arms wide open: everything I have is yours. You belong in this embrace. You belong in this house. You belong here, and there isn't one thing you can do to change that. You see, God isn't interested in whether we've got it right or wrong. God is interested in us. It's a breathtaking, shocking, scandalous promise that is our God. But it is offered for you on this day, just as it is for everyone on every day. Let us run to this embrace. Let us come home to this house of belonging that is our God.